What if Muggles knew about magic? About witches, wizards, wands, spells, and flying broomsticks? And what would they say if they knew that some of these magical folk could teleport across the country in seconds, erase memories with a flick of the wrist, and kill without leaving a trace? Today we'll be answering a question that the foundation of the wizarding world was built to avoid. What would happen if the Muggles found out about magic? Let's dive into it. Hey everyone, welcome to another installment of Harry Potter Theory. The magical world's divide from the Muggle world is outlined pretty clearly in the first book, and it's certainly not a concept that's hard to understand. Wizards don't openly perform, talk about, or even acknowledge the existence of magic in front of Muggles. Entire streets, buildings, and institutions are hidden behind enchantments, and when something does go wrong, memory charms are used to help keep the illusion intact. The two worlds don't really coexist, they just kind of exist side by side, carefully separated by layers of magic, lore, and deliberate misinformation. And that separation isn't just cultural or unspoken, it's enforced by a single law at the heart of the wizarding world, the International Statute of Secrecy. And the purpose of the statute is simple: to ensure that magic remains hidden from non-magical people at all costs. It governs how witches and wizards interact with Muggles, restricts the public use of magic, and requires magical authorities to intervene whenever secrecy is threatened. In other words, the law was devised to protect the existence of the wizarding world itself. It was built for self-preservation. But in today's video, I want to discuss a world where that law no longer exists. A world where the statute of secrecy fails, or is deliberately broken, and magic is suddenly exposed to modern Muggle society. I'd like to explore how Muggles would actually react to discovering magic today, how governments and institutions would respond, and perhaps most importantly, what the consequences would be for the divide between the two worlds. But in order to get there, first we need to take a step back. Because as strange as it sounds, the wizarding world wasn't always hidden, and Muggles, a very long time ago, knew quite a lot about magic. And before we start thinking about what they would do, first we need to take a look at what they've already done. The truth is that for centuries, the line separating Muggle from magical simply didn't exist in the way it does today. Witches and wizards even lived among non-magical people, often using their abilities to help friends and neighbors, healing illness, preventing the spread of disease, or easing injuries when no other options were available. And for the most part, there was no inherent hostility between the two communities. But that uneasy balance didn't last. Because beginning as early as the 14th century, Muggle attitudes toward magic began to change. Fear replaced familiarity, and suspicion replaced trust. Across Europe, and eventually beyond, those with magical abilities were accused of consorting with dark forces, put on trial, and condemned to death. And over the course of roughly 400 years, tens of thousands of people were tried for witchcraft, with many executed for crimes that, in reality, amounted to simply being different. Dumbledore's notes in his copy of The Wizard and the Hopping Pot describe just how dangerous everyday life had become for wizard kind during this period. The persecution of witches and wizards was gathering pace all over Europe in the early 15th century. Many in the magical community felt, and with good reason, that offering to cast a spell on the Muggle next door's sickly pig was tantamount to volunteering to fetch the firewood for one's own funeral pyre. "Let the Muggles manage without us," was the cry, as the wizards drew further and further apart from their non-magical brethren. As fear spread, witches and wizards were forced to adapt. Many began living double lives, using concealment charms to protect themselves and their families. And eventually, entire magical households started establishing hidden communities within Muggle villages, present but unseen. As the witch hunts grew fiercer, that secrecy began to turn inward as well. By the 17th century, even fraternizing with Muggles could make a witch or wizard suspect within their own community, an outcast among their peers. It was clear that something had to change. By the late 17th century, tensions between the two worlds had reached a breaking point, with well-respected members of the wizarding community attempting to appeal directly to Muggle authority, pleading for protection under non-magical law. But those appeals just went unanswered, and with no assurance of safety and no sign that persecution would end, wizardkind made a decision that would reshape history. They withdrew. What followed was the introduction of the International Statute of Secrecy, first signed in 1689 and officially ratified in 1692. Enacted by the International Confederation of Wizards, the statute was designed to permanently conceal the existence of witches and wizards from the Muggle population, placing responsibility on each magical government to control magical activity and prevent exposure at all costs. On the surface, the statute appears to mark the beginning of peace, an end to witch hunts, persecution, and open conflict. But it also created something else entirely, a permanent, enforced divide between the magical and non-magical worlds. And that divide would go on to define everything that followed. Which brings us to today. In the modern era, only a handful of Muggles know anything at all about the wizarding world. This includes the parents of muggle-born witches and wizards and, at the very highest level of government, the British Prime Minister, who was traditionally informed of the existence of the wizarding world on the night of their appointment. And I've got to say, I'm really not sure how we got to this point. The Statute of Secrecy was enacted in 1692, 333 years ago. And while that might sound like a long time, 3 centuries also seems like hardly long enough to completely erase centuries of shared history. But nevertheless, that seems to be the reality. I guess it's a testament to just how powerful the combined efforts of wizardkind have been in enforcing the Statute of Secrecy. Now, let's imagine this. Tomorrow, at the end of December 2025, the International Statute of Secrecy breaks. For one reason or another, witches and wizards across the world simply stop upholding the law entirely. There's no coordinated announcement, no formal declaration. Magic just starts appearing willy-nilly. Spells are cast in public. Magical creatures are seen where they shouldn't be. Witches and wizards are flying about. Enchantments fail, concealments drop, and things that were meant to stay hidden are suddenly visible to, well, anyone. I think that at first people would assume that it's all fake. CGI, a hoax, some unexplainable advancement in AI. But as the so-called stunt dragged on for days, then weeks, and the evidence kept piling up, I suspect that denial would slowly become impossible. Magic exists, and Muggles are there to witness it. At first, the realization wouldn't arrive all at once. It would settle in slowly, uncomfortably. News outlets would stop using words like alleged and unconfirmed. Governments would stop dismissing the footage as fake. And emergency meetings would be held behind closed doors, long before any official statements were made. And I also believe that, almost immediately, the existence of this magical world would be treated as a threat. Because from a Muggle perspective, this isn't just the discovery of something extraordinary. It's the sudden realization that there are people living among them who can do things that ignore every rule the modern world is built on. It's realizing all at once that there are people out there who can reshape reality in ways that can't be explained or controlled. And once denial collapses, the question isn't really about magic anymore, it's about people. I think conversations would shift from is this real to who controls this and how do we protect ourselves. Because when humans are confronted with something that upends their understanding of the world, the reaction is almost never calm acceptance. It's curiosity mixed with fear, fascination mixed with suspicion, and above all, a need to make sense of the unknown by putting it into familiar categories. I think that some people would be amazed. They'd want to see more, learn more, and potentially even try to experience it for themselves. But others would be deeply unsettled. Not because magic exists, but because it introduces a kind of uncertainty they never prepared for. And history shows us that when humans encounter something they don't understand, the instinct is to control it, contain it, or explain it away. Magic wouldn't be treated as a miracle for very long. It would be treated as a problem that needs to be solved. Now, the fact remains that the Muggle Prime Minister, the leading member of government in the Muggle world, does already know about the magical world. So in theory, at least he wouldn't be completely blindsided. He'd probably even try to get ahead of the situation by calming the public and keeping things from spiraling out of control. But the problem is simple. He's just one man. And I don't think that any single person, no matter how informed, could control a global reaction to something this disruptive. Once magic is out in the open, it stops being a political issue and becomes a social one. And there's another problem. If the Prime Minister appeared to know too much about the magical world, that knowledge wouldn't reassure the public, it would do the opposite. Because from a Muggle perspective, the first question would be, why didn't you tell us sooner? And the next one would be, what else have you been hiding? It wouldn't exactly spur confidence. People would feel misled, manipulated, and deliberately kept in the dark about something that directly affects their safety and understanding of reality itself. And with that trust broken, I believe that any attempts to calm the public would only make things worse. This leaves us with two things happening at once: the sudden appearance of a powerful, unexplainable phenomenon, and a complete collapse of trust in government. And when that happens, society doesn't move in one direction. It splinters. Some people would be amazed. To them, magic would feel hopeful, proof that the world is bigger, stranger, and full of new possibilities. They'd want to learn more, understand it, maybe even celebrate it. And it wouldn't take long for a more uncomfortable question to surface. Why them? Magic, as far as we know, isn't something you can learn. You're either born with it or you're not. And the moment that reality sets in, admiration starts to give way to resentment. But others wouldn't see wonder at all. They'd see risk. The idea that someone could alter memories, teleport across the country, or brew love potions without consequence wouldn't feel exciting, it would feel dangerous, a breakdown of safety. And then there are those who are caught in the middle, curious but cautious, open-minded but uneasy, unsure what to believe or who to trust. And these divides would deepen quickly. Because magic isn't something you can disagree about quietly. It touches fear, belief, identity, and power. And once the question stops being, is this real, and becomes, what does this mean for me, the damage is already done. As the saying goes, people fear what they don't understand and hate what they can't conquer. And magic would be both. In the days and weeks that followed, reactions wouldn't just differ, they'd harden. Groups would begin to form around what magic should mean, and what should be done about the people who wield it. Some would demand answers, others would demand action, and many would demand accountability for the fact that this had been hidden for so long. Many would expect them to step forward and start fixing things: disease, climate, poverty, war. And when magic inevitably failed to solve problems that were never simple to begin with, admiration would quickly turn to resentment. At the same time, fascination would curdle into obsession. Some people would treat witches and wizards like celebrities or demigods or resources. The wealthy would try to buy access. Others would try to monetize magic outright. And there would be no shortage of opportunists, magical and non-magical alike, willing to sell their loyalty, their abilities, or their silence in exchange for money, protection, or prestige. Then there are the darker instincts. Fear doesn't just create caution, it creates hostility. Religious extremism would resurface, framing magic as unnatural or dangerous. Conspiracy theories would thrive, and there would be people who don't just want to understand magic, but to study it, test it, control it, regardless of consent. History has shown us what happens when fear meets power imbalance. Anti-magic movements would emerge. So would radical magical purists, viewing Muggles as a threat that finally confirmed their worst suspicions. Clashes wouldn't start as wars. They'd start as isolated incidents, attacks, retaliation, justifications framed as self-defense. And slowly, the idea of coexistence would begin to erode. And this is where things start to feel eerily familiar. Because none of this would actually be new. As I mentioned earlier, long before the Statute of Secrecy, witches and wizards already lived openly among Muggles. They helped where they could, they healed the sick, they used magic to improve everyday life. And for a time, that uneasy coexistence worked, right up until fear began to outweigh gratitude. When magic stopped being understood, it stopped being welcomed. When it couldn't be controlled, it became something to fear. And when fear took hold, coexistence collapsed. And I think that what we'd witness in the modern world would be history coming full circle. The same questions would surface, just framed in modern language. Why should they have this power? Why don't we? Why should they be trusted? And just like before, those questions wouldn't stay theoretical for long. The instinct to dominate what can't be understood remains the same. Different century, different tools, same outcome. In that sense, the Statute of Secrecy doesn't just look like a law meant to hide magic. It starts to look like a lesson learned the hard way, a recognition that the first attempt at coexistence failed, and that without secrecy, the second attempt might fail in exactly the same way. Only this time, the consequences wouldn't be limited to a few villages or kingdoms. They'd be global. And I think that ultimately, it would lead to one of the worst and most destructive wars either world had ever seen. And that's it for this video. This was a much bigger topic than anticipated, but I'd be happy to make a longer, more in-depth version in the future if you guys are interested. Also, be sure to let me know down in the comments what you think would happen. Until next time, remember, it does not do to dwell on dreams and to forget to live.